One of my deepest desires in life has always been to explore the unknown, no matter how far away in time or space those things might be. And over the course of the 31 years I've spent on Earth, I've always managed to dream impossibly big dreams. Astrophotography has always been one of those seemingly impossible things to me, where 5 years ago, I really didn't even know that you could do this sort of thing from Earth. I was under the impression you'd have to have some sort of telescope in space like Hubble or James Webb, or at the very least have some sort of observatory at the top of some unreachable mountain. When I stumbled across some YouTube videos 5 or 6 years ago showing me what was possible from Earth, with a telescope in your own backyard, it pretty much changed the entire trajectory of my life all at once in that moment. It opened my eyes to a whole new way of looking up at the sky. I've barely just begun to scratch the surface of what's possible, but it sure has kept those big dreams alive inside of me. So I've spent almost the last half-decade honing my skills as an astrophotographer and trying to absorb as much knowledge as possible to help myself grow in this hobby. I don't think I've mastered any one particular area of astrophotography, but the challenges sure haven't stopped me from exploring every object that looks interesting to me. And one of the most interesting things I've come across so far is dark nebulae. These are massive clouds of dust and matter floating in our galaxy that are so thick and dense that they block the starlight from passing through them. I've tried capturing these objects with my setup a fair share of times, but nothing ever felt good enough or like it was finished to me. So I kind of gave up for a while, because I thought maybe I lacked the skill in capturing or processing them. And that was really the end of it until recently when I picked up my new scope. This was the first time I ever had access to a longer focal length scope with a relatively fast focal ratio. And it's pretty rare that I end up with a clear night around the new moon. But this month was a little bit different, and it looked like this was the first time in a while that everything was gonna line up. So I figured, what the heck, it might be time to try my hand at one of these dark nebulae again. One in particular that I've always been drawn to has been LDN 673. There's something incredibly beautiful to me about this object because it sits in front of the dense star field of our own Milky Way galaxy, roughly between the Cygnus-Sator region and the core of our Milky Way. For the first few nights that I worked on this project, I had the Askar 103 rigged up with the 0.6 reducer behind it, bringing me down to 420 millimeters focal length at f4. I used my trusty ASI 294 on the back of it and a UV-IR cut filter. This camera has proven itself to me time and time again over the last 3 or 4 years, so I was relatively confident in its abilities. So I spent the first couple clear nights shooting 120-second subs with a 294 on the back of the Askar 103. But I just wasn't satisfied with the results I was getting. Everything seemed pretty soft and like it lacked the detail that I was expecting out of the image. I even spent a few nights running 60-second subs to see if that would make any difference with an increased number of sub exposures. And unfortunately, it still left me hugely unsatisfied. I don't want to sit here and bore you with the details of image scale or sampling, because I don't really even understand it that well myself. I've taken a lot of great images with setups that would be considered heavily undersampled, so I normally just don't pay much attention to this because I know there's a lot of variables that determine what the best sampling ratio is for your setup and your location. And I don't want to overcomplicate things for myself. I had to make a choice on whether I would continue to work on this project or if I should just scrap it and jump into something new. And as I thought deeper about this whole ordeal, I thought maybe it'd be cool to take a trip down memory lane and test out my very first dedicated astronomy camera, the ASI 183 MC Pro. I haven't used this camera in maybe 3 or 4 years since I picked up the 294, and that's because it proved to be a pretty finicky camera to get the hang of as a beginner. Don't get me wrong, I've seen a lot of people create incredible photos from this camera, but I just had a really difficult time with it. My stars always seemed bloated, my images lacked saturation, and I know it's probably because I was overexposing. You know, as a beginner, we all want to dive deep into those 300-second exposures or longer, so I think I was just guilty of pushing it way beyond what it was meant to be used for. I thought it might be worth trying because the image scale seemed to be a little bit better, and it's somewhere around 20 megapixels versus the 11 megapixels of the 294. I figured this might help give me a little extra resolution and detail in the final image. So the next night I was able to, I rigged up the 183, waited for the Milky Way to rise, and anxiously started working back on LDN 673. Based on what I was seeing, I definitely felt like I was capturing more detail, but I was still really struggling with the processing. There were so many stars in this image that it was creating a real headache for me. I was having a really tough time trying to stretch both the stars and nebula independently of each other, or even all together. I wasn't really sure how to proceed from here, It felt too late to jump back to the 294, plus I'd be sacrificing all the increased detail that I was now capturing. So I just kept pouring on data every clear night that I had until something incredible happened.
It's 93 million miles away, but the violent eruptions on the sun are about to provide a spectacular night show to a lot of Earthlings, as a fierce magnetic storm brings the northern lights to regions that rarely see them.
A spike in solar activity has scientists issuing their first severe geomagnetic storm watch in nearly 20 years.
All week long, I kept hearing about this new huge sunspot that was ejecting massive amounts of material that were headed straight towards Earth. It was rumored that these solar storms were going to cause the aurora to be visible as far south as Alabama. I didn't pay much attention to it though, because I figured I was way too far south to see anything worthwhile. On the night of May 10th, I had my telescope set up out in the yard and I was waiting for astronomical darkness to set in so I could work on a few other targets before I made my way to LDN 673. I decided I'd poke my head out the door of my studio to see if anything was going on. I couldn't see anything with my own eyes, but I pulled my phone out and took a 3-second exposure with night mode. As soon as that photo popped up, the entire sky was glowing pink. I grabbed all my cameras as quickly as I could and I took off down the road to this open clearing over the marsh that has a great view north over the horizon. I set up 2 cameras on tripods to run time lapses, and I used a 3rd camera to capture some handheld video, and I was absolutely shocked at what I was seeing. I never imagined this would be possible to see this far south. If anything, I thought it would just be a very faint glow out over the horizon. It was honestly life-changing to see this from pretty much my own backyard, and just a hair over 30 days after seeing a total solar eclipse for the first time. I even had the opportunity to take some photos of my car under the aurora, and cars have always been a passion of mine as far back as I can remember. Something you guys probably don't know about me yet is that for about the last 6 years, I've worked as a videographer and editor for a relatively large automotive YouTube channel called TRC. I honestly never thought I'd get an opportunity to mix these two worlds together of astrophotography and cars, but creating that photo is something I will never forget. I stayed out there until probably 2 or 3 in the morning as I watched the aurora slowly fade away as the Milky Way began to rise into the sky and the moon set behind the trees. It's been incredibly challenging to shoot around the bad weather, as well as keeping myself up until sunrise every night. But seeing the aurora for the very first time in my life felt like a sign from the universe just telling me to keep going. For the next couple of nights, I continued shooting LDN 673, trying to ensure that I'd have something to show for all the effort I put in so far. In this hobby, sometimes the reward can seem so small or far away, but there are definitely times that the universe has other surprises in store to make up for it. I've seen a lot more impressive images of LDN 673 than what I captured, but this one is really special because it belongs to me. I tend to be pretty hard on myself when it comes to my own images, especially in this day and age when it's so easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to others. As you can probably see, I definitely had a lot of trouble processing those stars like I mentioned earlier, so I decided to throw some diffraction spikes on some of the brightest stars to maybe distract a little bit from how ugly they might be. This isn't something that I would normally do, and I know a lot of people aren't really into the fake diffraction spike thing, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Through this whole process, I've never wanted to be the best astrophotographer out there. I just wanted to prove to myself that I can do it. Remember back to the very first image of the night sky you ever took. Can you still feel that excitement and accomplishment that you felt in that moment? Those are the feelings that got me hooked and what changed my life forever. It's what keeps me coming back for more every clear night that I get, no matter what the outcome is. Staying up all night and chasing that never-ending dream of seeing the unseen. I hope you're making the most out of every clear night you get under the stars, and I'll see you soon.